November 9th, 2014, from Ralph Wilson Stadium in Buffalo, New York. It was the Kansas City Chiefs at the Buffalo Bills. The Bills won the toss and they elected to defer, so Kansas City would take over first and they would go 3 and out. So Buffalo would take over on their own 49 with about 13 minutes left in the first quarter. And they would end up bringing the ball into Kansas City territory shortly thereafter. And then they were faced with a 3rd and 6 on the Kansas City 35. Kyle Orton dropped back and he hit Fred Jackson on a short pass that Jackson took 10 yards. So now it's a first down on the 25, and Orton dropped back and he hit Hogan for a 25-yard touchdown pass that put the first points on the scoreboard, with the score now Buffalo 7, Kansas City 0. Kansas City responded with the drive, as with less than 10 minutes left in the first, they started off on their own 20, but Smith hit Bowe with a 10-yard pass. It was actually a fumble, but they ended up recovering and gaining another 9 yards, as now it was a first down on the 43. And then on a 3rd and 12 from the 41, Smith ended up scrambling for the first down as he ran for 12 yards and brought the ball into Buffalo territory. He was hit, and it ended up being an unnecessary roughness call, and so it's now a first down on the Buffalo 32. Then on 2nd and 7 from the 29, Smith hit Bowe for an 8-yard pass to make it a first down on the 21. But then their drive ended up stalling on the 18, and Santos would come out to attempt the 36-yarder. It was up, it was good, and he put the first points on the board for the Chiefs, as they now trail by 4 with the score Buffalo 7, Kansas City 3. So now Buffalo would take over on their own 29, but they would punt the ball 6 plays later when their drive stalled on the Kansas City 41. So now the Chiefs would take over on their own 14 with about 2.5 minutes left in the first quarter. On 2nd and 6, Smith hit Jenkins for a 27-yard pass that would bring the ball out to the 45, but their drive would stall, and on the final, before the quarter came to a close, actually, it was 4th and 8 on the 47, and Colquitt punted the ball. So now Buffalo would get the ball with just about 30 seconds left in the first quarter. And they would end up bringing the first quarter to a close when Fred Jackson ran for a 10-yard run on 2nd and 19 from the Buffalo 4. And that would bring it out to the 14. So after one quarter of play, the score was Buffalo 7, Kansas City 3. So to start things off in the second quarter was 3rd and 9 from the Buffalo 14. And it ended up being an incomplete pass as Tom Bahali was all over Kyle Orton. And so now Buffalo would punt the ball. So the Chiefs would take over on their own 38, but they would go 3 and out and punt the ball back to Buffalo, who also would go 3 and out, and they punted it back to Kansas City. Kansas City now had the ball on their own 30 with about 12 minutes left before halftime. Then on 2nd and 4 from the 36, Niall Davis was blown up by Bradham, who forced the fumble. Wynn recovered, and now it was Buffalo ball on the Kansas City 31. They got all the way down into the red zone and all the way to the 8-yard line, but their drive stalled, and Dan Carpenter would come out to attempt a 26-yard field goal. It was up, it was good, and the Bills were now back up by 7 points with the score Buffalo 10, Kansas City 3. So now the Chiefs took over with about 7 minutes left in the second quarter. They had the ball on their own 30. They did pick up a first down, but then their drive stalled in Buffalo territory on the 40, and they would punt it. So now Buffalo took over on their own 20 with less than 4 minutes left before halftime. They would bring the ball up towards midfield, but they would end up punting the ball from their own 45. So now Kansas City took over with a little over a minute left before halftime. They were backed up against their own end zone on the 4. They would get out of the shadow of their end zone as Jamaal Charles ran for 8 yards and then 4 yards, and the first half came to a close. So at halftime, the score was Buffalo 10, Kansas City 3. So to start things off in the third quarter, the Buffalo Bills had the ball on their own 24. They would bring the ball across midfield and into Kansas City territory. And they would get it all the way up to the 5-yard line of the Kansas City Chiefs. 1st and goal on the 5, and then Brown ended up fumbling the ball. Parker forced the fumble and ended up being a touchback as the ball went out of bounds. And so now the Chiefs would take over on their own 20, just as the Bills had been looking to extend their lead by at least 3, maybe as many as 7 points but with that fumble out of bounds, it was a touchback, and the Chiefs had it on their own 20 with about 10 minutes left in the third. They brought it out to the 32, but they ended up punting the ball. So now Buffalo would take over with about 8 minutes left in the third. They had the ball on their own 24. They picked up a first down with a 14-yard run by Brown, and then Dixon ran for 27 yards to make it a first down in Kansas City territory on the 35. And then on 2nd and 11 from the 25, Orton hit Brown for a 14-yard pass that made it a first down on the 11. And they ended up getting it down to the 3-yard line, but they couldn't pick up the first down on 3rd and 2. And so out came Dan Carpenter to attempt his third field goal of the game. This one, a 21-yarder. It was up. It was good. And so now the score was 13-3. Actually, the second field goal of the game. So the Bills were up by 10 points at this point. And now with 3 minutes left in the third, the Chiefs took over on their own 20. They would bring the third quarter to a close when on 2nd and 10 from the 40, Smith hit Bowe for a 12-yard pass to pick up a first down in Buffalo territory on the 48. But after 3 quarters of play, the score was Buffalo 13, Kansas City 3. So to start things off in the fourth quarter, the Chiefs had the ball on the Buffalo 48. It was a first down. An incomplete pass brought up second down. Smith was then sacked by Hughes for a 6-yard loss, and it was 3rd and 16. Smith then hit Bowe for a 15-yard pass, and that would bring up 4th and 1 from the Buffalo 39. And so instead of punting the ball or going for a long field goal, it would have been a 56-yarder. Instead, they elected to go for it, and they gave the ball to Jamaal Charles, and he ended up taking it 39 yards for a touchdown. It was 4th and 1. They only needed a yard, but Jamaal said, I'm going to take this to the house. And so now Kansas City only trailed by 3 with the score Buffalo 13, Kansas City 10. So now Buffalo took over with about 13 and a half minutes left in this game. They had it on their own 22, but they would end up punting the ball 4 plays later from their 41. So now the Chiefs took over with about 11 and a half minutes left in this game, trailing by a field goal, but they would go 3 and out, and they punted it back to Buffalo. But on the punt, Sherman fumbled. Actually, Sherman forced the fumble. McLevin fumbled, and Sherman recovered. And now the Kansas City Chiefs got the ball right back after that 3 and out, and they had it on the Buffalo 26. Jamaal Charles then ran for 18 yards to make it 1st and goal on the 8. Smith then dropped back, and he ended up just taking it in himself as Alex Smith scores the touchdown on the 8-yard run, and the Chiefs take the lead, and the score was now 17-3. So the Chiefs are up by 4 at this point with 9 minutes left in this game. Buffalo now had the ball on their own 20. They picked up a first down, but then their drive stalled on the 41, and they ended up with a 4th and 1, and instead of going for it, they ended up punting the ball. And so now the Chiefs would take over with a little less than 7 minutes left in this game. They were up by 4 points, but they would go 3 and out. So Buffalo would get the ball back with about 4.5 minutes left in the game. They had it on the Kansas City 25 as they were already in field goal range, but they needed a touchdown. And so they would chip away, and they ended up getting a first down, and that was first down after being faced with a 3rd and 1, but Summers ended up picking up the yard. So now it's first down on the 15, and an incomplete pass on first down, then an incomplete pass on second down, and an incomplete pass on third down. So now it was 4th down on the 15, and a field goal wouldn't do them much good, although it might not have been a bad idea, but instead they went for it. And on 4th down, a 4th consecutive incomplete pass. This one was nearly intercepted, and the ball was turned over on downs. So now the Chiefs would take over with a 4-point lead with about 2.5 minutes left in this game. They had the ball on the Kansas City 15, and they would chip away, but they wouldn't get far. They did pick up a first down, but they would end up punting the ball from the 36 with less than half a minute left to play. So now Buffalo would take over with just seconds on the clock, needing a touchdown. They had it on their own 20. They needed to go 80 yards in about 15 seconds. Fred Jackson picked up 14 yards off a pass from Orton on first down. And so now it was the first down on the 34, and it was 7 seconds left on the clock. Orton drops back. He hits Jackson. Jackson picked up 9, but then he fumbled the ball. and it didn't even matter because it was just crazy. They were like, the fumble occurred because they were attempting a backward pass because they were just like kept trying to keep the ball alive. They're like, yeah, let's just keep tossing it, but eventually it would just be recovered by Kansas City, and then the game came to a close as that was the final play, and the Kansas City Chiefs win this one with the final score, Kansas City 17, Buffalo 13. And with the win, the Chiefs are now 6-3, 3-2 on the road, and with the loss, the Buffalo Bills are now 5-4, 2-3 at home. And in this game, Alex Smith was 17 for 29 with 177 passing yards. He also rushed for 25 yards off of 4 carries and had a rushing touchdown. Kyle Orton was 29 for 48 with 259 passing yards and a touchdown. He also ran for 3 yards off of 2 carries. The leading rusher in this game was Jamaal Charles with 15 carries for 98 yards and a touchdown. Jamaal Charles also had 20 yards receiving off of 3 receptions. The leading receiver in this game was Dwayne Bowe with 93 yards off of 8 receptions. Bryce Brown had 35 yards rushing off of 7 carries. He also had 65 yards receiving off of 6 receptions. And on defense, these two teams had tied for the leading tacklers. Kansas City had 2 guys, each have 8 tackles, is Allen Bailey and Ron Parker each had 8 tackles. And for Buffalo, Preston Brown had 8 tackles. Those were your leading tacklers. The Bills had 6 sacks in this game, just 1 sack for the Chiefs. Marcel Darius had 3 sacks. Hughes had 2 sacks, and Super Mario had 1 sack. So it was a sack party for Buffalo. The Chiefs only had 1 sack, and that was Dontari Poe. But it was the interception. Well, there was no interceptions in this game, but those fumbles, though, made it big. They made the difference. Even though each team fumbled the ball a decent amount, 2 fumbles for Kansas City. They only lost 1, but 3 fumbles for Buffalo, and they lost all 3. So, crazy game, low scoring, lots of defense, and the Chiefs come up with a huge road victory with the final score, Kansas City 17, Buffalo 13.